Chapter 22. Mistakes were made. Remember particularly that you cannot be a judge of anyone, for no one can judge a criminal until he recognizes that he is just such a criminal as the man standing before him, and that he perhaps is more than all men to blame for that crime. When he understands that, he will be able to judge. He will be able to be a judge. Though that sounds absurd, it is true. If I had been righteous myself, perhaps there would have been no criminal standing before me. If you can take upon yourself the crime of the criminal your heart is judging, take it at once, suffer for him yourself, and let him go without reproach. And even if the law itself makes you his judge, act in the same spirit so far as possible, for he will go away and condemn himself more bitterly than you have done. If, after you kiss, he goes away untouched, mocking at you, do not let that be a stumbling block to you. It shows his time has not yet come, but it will come in due course. And if it come not, no matter. If not he, then another in his place will understand and suffer, and judge and condemn himself, and the truth will be fulfilled. Believe that, believe it without doubt, for in that lies all the hope and faith of the saints. Fyodor Dostoevsky, The Brothers Karamazov. Animals were herded, sold, and eaten along the journey north, a rhythm of tending to them and assuring the route was passable to find the caravan, followed by evenings spent around the central fire. The triangular stringed instrument from Russia, known as a balalaika, was thrust on Mellor one night, a week into their trips. A variety of songs were sung, some bawdy and what may be expected of such apparent bohemians, but some with a distinctly orthodox flair Mellor couldn't help but notice. As he became familiar with these travelers, he learned some had more mystical convictions than others. Convictions than others. Beautiful Sonechka was a spiritual conduit for the group. Her word carried power, though it was outranked by her father, the group's true leader. She was also a powerful dancer, but singing was not one of her powers, though she did offset being off-key through great enthusiasm. Usually a sing-along started, and everybody joined in, mercifully drowning her out. When Mellor drunkenly responded to one of these songs, and carried it admirably, some discussion among musicians developed. One fellow needed to stretch, and chanced trusting the balalaika to Mellor, who was stunned, then remembered a sad old ballad about life, love, and a river. It was Tечет река Volga, roughly translated, the river Volga flows, composed for an old Soviet film. What follows are lyrics and their rhythmic English approximation. The lyrics are in both Russian and English. Those who get to read the book can check out the Russian. I'll just read you the English. From very far through time, the river flows Volga. The river flows Volga, and it has no end. Among the ripest crops, among the whitest snow, the river flows Volga, and I am 17 years old. My mother said, it all happens, son. Perhaps you will get tired of the roads. When you come home at the end of goads, put your hands in the Volga flows. From very far through time, the river flows Volga. The river flows Volga, and it has no end. Among the ripest crops, among the whitest snow, my river flows Volga, and I am 30 years old. That first look and first splashing of an oar, all's been but only the river took us for. I don't miss that past spring. Your love is in return with me. From very far through time, the river flows Volga. The river flows Volga, and it has no end. Among the ripest crops, among the whitest snow, the river flows Volga, and I am 70 years old. Here's my birth, and here they are my friends. Impossible to live in a world without them. From far reaches, in a star silence, another boy is joining me in song. From very far through time, the river flows, Volga. The river flows, Volga, and it has no end. Among the ripest crops, among the whitest snow, the river flows, Volga, and I am 17 years old. Halfway into the song, hands began to clap together and the melody's refrain became known. One man with a bass instrument to complement his deep throat warbling joined in, and ladies hummed harmony. I'm going to read that again. One man with a bass instrument to complement his deep throat warbling joined in, and ladies hummed harmony. The song was slow and sad, but profound and perhaps and perfect for a night in the overlap between autumn and winter, at the foot of the hills along a valley hemmed by China in the great Russian East. Himari watched from where she sat huddled on the back of one of the old carriages that stayed in the center of the circle of gypsy motorhomes. For the first time, her eyes rested on Melor's face a while, taking in the beard and the balalaika. She only ever saw that single picture, the one her mother used to take out from time to time, usually before a wrestling match with a bottle of spirits. When Melor finished his tune, a musician returned and took back the balalaika with congratulatory words. Himari couldn't understand them. There was laughter, and then a moment later, Melor stood and made his way from the fire, headed toward his own quarters among the single men. She ran to him and gave him a hug, turning to catch his eye. Melor was surprised, not immediately registering the significance of this initiated contact. She held his eye before she said, "You are the balalaika man. I knew it," and ran off. Melor didn't respond, looking after her, feeling as though a wind had gone through his mind. This kept him from sleep most of the night. When things wound down around the fire, and Sonetchka finished gathering the young women to bed, she also had a difficult rest. She dreamed she was in the mountains, and there were an abundance of berries and bushes right near the path she found. It was warm but not hot, and the wind was mild. She was herding several goats. One had a little chin beard that was only typical of his kind. He also had a typical attitude. He was the larger of the two. The other was a kid in the truest sense of the word, and thoroughly dumb. She had to keep an eye on it. As they came around a corner, she spied far in the distance a dragon watching, hiding between trees, only given away by a thin line of smoke and her keen smell. She didn't immediately say anything to the goats as they plodded along. The smaller of the two wore a very pretty golden bell, and it would jangle intermittently. Sonetchka heard a rustling behind her, and turning, saw another dragon. This one bereft of green and instead wearing a conglomeration of tropical reds, oranges, and yellows, with a terrifying scarlet mane past its shoulders and eyes entirely malcontent. The green dragon ahead was at the water's edge of a clear, wide pool. The one in hot colors behind came from a no-man's land of pain. Suddenly it attacked, and Sonetchka screamed at the goats, running behind them until they were motivated and soon outpaced her, coming down the far end of the path toward the water, behind which hid the other dragon. Sonetchka managed to corral the goats, but the big one tried to kick up a fuss. She had to forcibly compel him to follow her guidance until they came to a third, hidden path that went up and around the lake without coming near it. The dragon pursuing behind lost its quarry and howled. The green dragon came from the woods and bellowed at the other monster. "You now approach my grounds and may go no further." The fiery one replied, "Your grounds have things that are mine among them, and I will have what is mine." If it is within my territory, it has become mine," insisted the green dragon, and they began to fight it out in epic dragon fashion, complete with balls of fire, flesh-ripping claws, teeth like knives eviscerating flesh, and a cornucopia of basso cries at such volume a lion's roar would have felt like a kitten's mew. Sonetchka was elated, as her and the goats were forgotten. They continued to flee deep into the forest and were safe a time, but what socked Sonetchka awake was this. When they found safety, she sat and exhaled fear with the kid and the other goat, who both bleated appreciatively. Then she felt something at the back of her neck and turned to see a diverse dragon, more ferocious than the other two, red of eye, dark of skin, and ravenous. Its teeth were endless, its size inescapable, and fast as a snake it opened wide its jaws. Sonechka fell out of the bed in terror, breathing fast, wreathed in sweat. Himari, in the couch across the camper, couldn't help but be startled into consciousness herself. She didn't make eye contact, but said, "The schedule has at least 1 more hour of sleep." This was Japanese, so Sonechka couldn't understand. She replied, "Himari, get dressed, get all your things, and mind each step." She started gathering things herself, pointing at her wrist where a watch would be. Himari squinted and responded in the affirmative, never making eye contact, but slowly rousing herself and going to where her items were always neatly stored. She was already holding the cube. She always kept it close to her person. Sonechka threw on something warm, zipped up her boots, and marched to the trailer of single men, opening the door unceremoniously and rousing Mellor out of a sleep to the protest of half the others. She made no attempt at silence this time. "Okay, I'll come outside." Mellor yawned and followed through. Sonechka spoke quickly and urgently. "How deep are your pockets? Could you buy a motorhome if you had to?" Mellor blinked at her sideways. "I've got what I've got, but it depends on price. What is this?" "Don't talk back, you disobedient goat, or you'll be dragon feed." "Goat? What? Can we get a coffee at the center fire? It's not even light." "We cannot go to Lake Kanka with the rest. We will have to miss the autumn exchange." "What are you talking about?" "Mellor Romanov, there is a dragon at Lake Kanka and one behind, colored like Korean dictators, and hungry for that thing your Himari carries. And there is even a third dragon I know nothing of." 3 dragons. "What?" "My dream, you goat." They made it to the center fire, and Mellor acquired the coffee he alluded to. "You have a bad dream." "You don't understand. I dreamed," she gestured vaguely but insistently at him. "I dreamed this." "Did you?" "You wouldn't listen to my direction, and the dragon nearly ate us. Understand me now. God speaks in dreams. And my line goes back right to Mother Lavina, who was told in a dream when her father-in-law would come and free her and Moksha from their evil tyrant patriarch. She dreamed and was delivered, and so did Moksha dream. And so all whose line goes so far back have always been warned by God in dreams. Even others not of Lavina line have known this. But I am of that line, and my dreams are true." Mellor blinked. "Okay, I'm humoring you. What do we do? There's one vehicle here that's roadworthy and sturdy enough for the trip. The very same I picked you up in. It's used by multiple families for multiple reasons, though I know who has the use of it presently. We can get it for the equivalent of 8,000 American. Can you absorb this? We get it. We go up the valley. I know ways without roads and safe harbor. I know some ways. I can tell you know others." "Sit down, Sonechka," Mellor said. "I don't dispute what you're saying, and I've been wondering when I'd hear from the Koreans or others. But there is safety here, until we have reason to believe otherwise. Listen, how long between when you have a dream and when it comes true?" There was a thud, and both of them looked up and behind. A purple pillar of flame growled into the night, and people were waking in alarm. Sonechka gasped, staggering slightly. "The signal trailer!" "What?" "What more proof do you need, Mellor? That violet flame is distinct. It will be seen for miles and through the day. It will bring those travelers who deal in human tracking thinking and crocodile." She gestured wildly at the pillar. It was raging furiously from a trailer filled with explosives and kept as a sort of primal insurance for the gypsies, resting by itself without the RV circle. Such trailers were used either as a method of defense or to call for help from caravans that may be in the area. There's a very loose brotherhood among even competing clans of gypsies. Somebody is telling somebody else where we are, all right. No, somebody's telling somebody else where we are, all right. And one of your people definitely lit the trailer. So we cannot stay, Sonechka stressed. I'm sorry I doubted, Sonechka. I can swing 8,000, but let me amend. How about we don't buy a motorhome and go on our own? How about instead we get a group of 5 vans to go with? I can make it worth their while. Your clan keeps the trailer. We're safer in the storm. Or if there's a raid. She looked at him and paused, considering. Finally, she shook her head. You are right, but we cannot trust everyone in this caravan. My kin, though they may be, do you not see the violet smoke? Who has lit this fire but an opportunist with no care for our end? And at this time I cannot think of any other units who could be trusted. Each will have 5 or 6 people. Maybe 1 or 2 of the group would work in several instances, but it's untenable. We would be best unencumbered. We must hope in God. Well, Melor said, then caught himself, saying instead, then we shouldn't announce our departure, and as you have rightly pointed out, we should go right now. Yes, Sonechka said, frustrated. I assume you roused Himari? Yes. Who is using that old trailer you picked us up in presently? Volodya, and he will let us buy from him. Why? Because otherwise I'll tell people. Tell people what? Shh! That's between me and Volodya. And very quickly Sonechka went about making the arrangements. These arrangements became an argument with Volodya. Then there was a show of false laughter from the man. Then several stiff shots of vodka were exchanged, and Melor peeled $8,000 from his steadily diminishing wad while Volodya and his boys cleared out their things. Sonechka was very persuasive, and so was the money. She also communicated that if they allowed use of the vehicle, not only would Volodya have pocket money, but his secret would remain safe. Also, he had to button his lip about their departure. That meant Volodya and company, evicted from sleep in the night, would have to lay low and return alone. The RV firing up and leaving could happen for any number of reasons, but if it were gone and the boys were in the camp, then there would be suspicions. They would have to return empty-handed and tell why. To understand how this was something they would even consider doing, understand that in that region at that time, $8,000 was worth 5 times the local value of the camper and everything inside it. Still, Volodya was put out. What do we tell them when we return? Develop in your mind a narrative as detailed as a novel from Dostoevsky, Sonechka suggested, and closed the door. Melor made a mental note to never give Sonechka any leverage whatever in the future, if he could avoid it. She was ruthless. They saw no one else before they left, and Sonechka took the wheel first, explaining the idiosyncrasies of the RV as she went, and with practiced experience, taking them down a number of dirt paths that eventually came to a highway which wanted to be taken as paved, but was in bad enough condition it might as well have been scattered rock. Melor was skittish around highways, owing to digital surveillance at nodes of traffic and general visibility from satellites, but it was yet dark, and Sonechka assured him they were only on the main avenue till daylight, and then she knew another route. Before then, back at the caravan of the children of Moksha and Mother Lavina, things suddenly became more complex. The Brotherhood of the Dragon's Tail were nearest the caravan in the general region, partially by design. Bureau 13 knew of the affiliation this gypsy fraternity had to VKD and therefore Green Colia, so Bureau 13 watched such VKD affiliates closely. The gypsies of the Brotherhood were nearby because they paced the children of Moksha on VKD orders from Green Colia. There were several routes through that valley near the Russian-Mongolian border. When the violet signal flare blew, doubtless lit by some Judas in the camp, strangely, the Brotherhood of the Dragon's Tail stayed where they were, merely issuing a report. That report was intercepted by surveilling members of Bureau 13, and now those dark-eyed specialists knew this neon-purple flare in the night was from the children of Moksha, where were the Japanese girl and Russian Robin Hood. Bureau 13 ambushed the caravan 40 minutes after Sonetchka made the deal for the motorhome while it was yet dark. They came in 10 black SUVs configured for off-road utility. Choi and 2 others were in the lead vehicle. They came with guns and ferocity. The children of Moksha held their peace and allowed the entire caravan to be searched, which turned up nothing, prompting a response to demonstrate how unsatisfactory this was to Choi. Said demonstration was an act of violence that deprived 2 horses of their lives and 1 old man the use of his leg, as the expired equines fell in such a way that a cart barreled into him. Gypsies generally do not like it when people abuse horses, least of all their own, or the elderly. There was an uproar, and the gypsies certainly outnumbered the Bureau 13 men. They were also mostly Russian and armed, half of them with extensive criminal education. Before, they tolerated intrusion. Violence of this kind, no. Onward came the firefight, and Choi pulled his men back after 2 were cut down in the exchange, surprised and overwhelmed at the swiftness and ferocity of the violence. The children of Moksha chased them almost 10 miles before they could regain a highway and disappear. This may sound like an expectable outcome, but North Koreans are not minuscule in battle. The miscalculation was on the show of force. Such intimidation did not impact gypsy psyche as it did the beleaguered peoples of the dynasty. The horse execution was meant to be punctuation, not instigation. For exactly the moment needed to lose the power exchange, Bureau 13's guard was down. They instinctively expected fear, not berserk rage. It was a very brief thing, a matter of seconds. If the gypsies had failed to rally in time, they would have been overcome even in their rage, but they hit their window, and Choi was forced to reevaluate his strategy. Not only did he lose 2 men and get routed by the gypsies, there were no Japanese girls or fellows remotely matching the Russian Robin Hood, nor had anyone seen any ethereal golden cubes. So it did appear a dead end, contrary to Miru's projection. This was very unexpected, as their particular approach precisely fit the most likely scenario. The horse execution was improvised, but then that was after their ambush turned up nothing. So they were already off the probability map. Choi made yet another mistake in that during the search, he purposely let on to be affiliated with the Brotherhood of the Dragon's Tail, despite his obvious North Korean accent around the poor Russian he hurled at them. He was believed, as such things as defectors turned gypsy mobsters were not unheard of. Accordingly, this narrative of Choi's fomented a gypsy feud between the children of Moksha and the Brotherhood of the Dragon's Tail, both of whom cyclically crossed the entirety of Russia, already disliked one another, and had affiliations the whole way. In Choi's mind, this tactic would complicate things for the Russian Robin Hood and his Japanese sidekick, helping to flush them into the open. What he didn't realize was that this would put Miru in direct conflict with Iskintel. Melor, Himari, and Sonetchka knew none of these things, as Sonetchka pulled them from a paved road to a conglomeration of ruts, rocks, and the occasional fallen tree, the removal of same becoming Melor's automatic duty as was necessary. Even so, he was somewhat satisfied they had taken to the road this way, as it meant they would likely attain Yakutsk quicker, and he could be clear of his burden with good conscience. Himari still held the little 10-pound clear gold cube in her hand from time to time, but was cautious to hide it. For several days things went well, until they pulled to a depot as their reserve tanks began to run dry and had to siphon farm equipment. Melor left American bills and apology, and Sonetchka checked in with a friendly family affiliate through a landline at a very sad little combination inn, post office, grocery store, and library. It was one building with one little old Sakha woman who couldn't be bothered. "It's a family war," Sonetchka said when she returned to the motorhome. She looked up at Melor, then down again. "You drive. I'll tell you where to go," she finally said. By then they were switching driving duties frequently. "What's a family war?" Melor thought he had an idea. "Dragon's Tail and Children of Moksha. We are If there are two groups of us who incidentally show up at the public event, some in those groups are going to die. Mellor started the engine. All the more reason to stay separate. You were wise to suggest this. I ruled out getting a vehicle, but I hadn't thought to backroad the trip in the Gypsy RV from Vladivostok to Yakutsk in early winter. You make fun of me. No, I'm serious. As the Americans say, I can compel this dog to hunt. What do they mean by that? I never learned. Something to do with the shortage of firearms in the South after the Civil War, I think. They had to train dogs. Sonetchka chuckled. Now you're joking. I couldn't tell you. It's not a very good joke. She looked out the window. It's at least amusing, Mellor observed. Then, Himari, are you okay back there? Himari was in extremely good spirits lately. It developed she rather liked the concept of traveling in an RV. It was like she could bring a small world she had come to understand with her at all times, and she was perfectly content to use the unit's restroom since there was at least hand sanitizer and it was kept mostly clean, and she had cleaned it, of course. The traveling cottage made her feel as though she had some control. She also loved the bed over the cab, and she could watch the mysterious green trees pass by like organic towers on either side, scraping low-hanging clouds as they drove deeper into wilderness. There was a rolling peace to it as the vehicle trundled along, rather like that of a ship on a spirited sea. Himari dangled her head down from the cab, hair everywhere, and said, I'm up here, and I'm fine. But it's about that time in the schedule where I would usually be having some sort of a snack. Should be something in the fridge. Go ahead. Thanks about it like a man. She met his eye again, this time through the mirror. Mellor turned back to the road and concentrated on it until the questions that came bubbling into his head at the nickname effervesced away. You're fond of her? Sonetchka asked. He looked over, then back at the road. I just want to I don't want to see any harm come to her, that's all. She's innocent. I was like this once. Autistic? Maybe a little. You're naughty. I mean, I was alone. No one is alone. She caught his eye this time. Why do you hate God? Mellor made a snorting sound. I just don't believe. No, you hate. You have more than ample reason to believe. What are you talking about? Sonetchka looked back, then forward. Well, that cube for one. You know what it is. Some funky Tower of Babel treasure is what the crazies say. And it had to come from a world that isn't this one? Sonetchka pressed. I've seen things, sure, but they can have more than one explanation, Sonetchka. Can they? They can be all sorts of things. It could be another planet, a government program, a psychedelic hallucinogen, a long sleep, a dream, a parallel universe. I mean, the list goes on. He fished out a cigarette and rolled a crack in the driver's side window. What have you seen? I've seen an autistic kid follow a cat into a North Korean maelstrom through some kind of portal. I've seen a guy in a mustache pull the same trick at the card game. I've seen a jungle world show up in the middle of a North Korean mausoleum with a window and a bog. And I've seen portals open and close and slice off body parts. Where I have gone, what I have seen, I don't know. I've seen cats rip holes in space and time, it looks like. What is that? I don't know. It could be many things. Where is this in your holy scriptures? You think scriptures are a play-by-play of all things in existence? No. Mellor took a final drag, rolled down the window, flicked his cigarette out, and rolled it back up. But you'd think an all-knowing God would put stuff in there. Oh, that's right, there are portals to other universes, and cats open them. But watch out, there's evil things that aren't aliens, but damn, don't they look like aliens, and they'll suck you up if you don't say my special code words. You know? Something like that. Sonetchka laughed and rolled her eyes, looking out her own window. You're just making excuses, she said. Tell me, if you want to convey a message to somebody in 1,000 years, how do you do it? Well, I would say, hey, there are holes in the world cats open up if you give them meat, and they've got demons back there. What is a cat? What is meat? What is a demon? What is a whole? Each term could have a separate context. Is it a cool cat, like the Americans say? Maybe a demon is a brand name of car. Meat could mean nourishment, and by nourishment, a culture might think you were referring to bread. Well, maybe I was referring to bread, partially. But don't evade the point. You see what I'm saying? To communicate something to future people, you must use terms and ideas that will transcend time and culture, you see? So this is what the words of God do. How? Well, in Job, God tells Job water snows on the mountain, melts down the rivers, flows to the sea, congeals into clouds, and snows back on the mountain. This is the hydrologic cycle abbreviated. So what? So from end to end, the directly applicable wisdom of a book given us by the grand artist of all is full of such wisdom, and it applies even in this precise situation. How, I ask you? Because we struggle not with flesh and blood, but principalities. And now, these principalities, these dragons, they resist one another even as they seek you and your girl and her gemstone and me by association. But you can leave any time. Not if I'm to fulfill my own duty. And what's that? To shepherd you goats safely. Why do you keep calling us goats? She laughed musically. Oh, I can't do that. Well, you do not know God. She does not know God. You are therefore not sheep, you are goats. Mello rolled his eyes. I suppose that's not as insulting as it could have been. You didn't tell me why you hate God. I don't hate God. I just... Listen, I never really knew my parents. I've been a hooligan since I was a child. I've been kidnapped, imprisoned, nearly eaten by cannibals, snapped up and shot out by the mob, kicked out of half a dozen countries, and I'm wanted in half a dozen more. I've had a tough go of it, Snow Maiden, and in my time, I haven't seen some divine loophole to keep me happy. I've seen wits and action and luck. But there is no luck, Sonetchka interrupted. If you were not guided, you would not have found me, you would not have found her, you would not have escaped North Korea. You told me your take on the heist, Melor, and your plan for exit would have certainly failed if not for the jeep and the wall-eyed cat, and yes, even Himari. It would have failed but for them. Perhaps you were set up to fail. No, Melor shook his head. What would you know of it? Only that what is may not always be what is seen. I will not berate you with spiritualism, Melor. I will ask one thing, though, so that in your darkest despair you may have hope. What's that? Do you know the way to preserve your soul? What? I've been to church before. You go on Sunday and you hobnob nicely with little old ladies. Sonetchka laughed and shook her head. No. Are you very familiar with computers? Oh, this is taking a turn. Mello replied with his own chuckle. I know a little. A computer has a virus. What do? You've got to reboot it or install some sort of antivirus. Yes. How do you know so much about computers? None of your people have any. Sonetchka blushed. Well, I don't really, but tell me, isn't that what you do? You reboot it or you use the antivirus? Sure, let's say, Mello responded, shaking his head. You have a computer virus, Mello. You were born with it. We all are. You didn't mean to get it. You just got it. Christ, he's the antivirus. He's the reboot. You understand? So all you do is acknowledge the antivirus software. You just click yes when it asks you to install, and it does the rest. You see? You just accept that God can protect you from the brokenness you were born into through no fault of your own. But if you don't accept the hedge of protection, you're open to the savages of the sin virus. So what do? Hey, God, thanks, you did great, I appreciate it. Is that it? Well, Sonetchka chuckled. Actually, more or less. What?
Well, believe in your heart and confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord, and God raised him from the dead, and repent. To believe in the first place, you must begin to repent a little. This is just wild coming from a tie-dyed Russian gypsy, you know that? Sonechka laughed. It's a wild world. I met some of you people in North Korea. Christians, I mean, not gypsies. Very interesting. If you see your life is fleeting, and you have not yet left this place, make the prayer. Mean it. It worked for one thief. Maybe it will work for you. What makes you say I'm a thief? She looked at him incredulous. Your entire purpose in North Korea was to steal, wasn't it? Mellor shrugged. Himari plopped her head over the back of the cab and said, Are you talking of computers? For she knew something of computers, and the word computer tends to be a cognate across most languages. Mellor translated what had been said until Himari was caught up. Maybe like a painting, Sonechka offered when he was done. This was also translated. Ooh, that's what Rohan-san told me. Yes, I know paintings. Himari nodded and disappeared again. After Mellor translated, Sonechka's eyes got wide. Wait! Excuse me 1 minute, Mel. Who's Rohan? You told me you found this cube before. You didn't tell me of Rohan. And she got out of her seat to discuss this thing with Himari, realizing a moment later that she would still need Mellor to translate, so she convinced Himari to jump down and sit cross-legged in the space just behind the two cab seats right in front of the cowling. The conversation continued a while as Himari described her entire trek in and out of the clear place, and how she met Rohan and lost the cat and found the cube and lost the cube and found it again. After a while, Sonechka said, See? If there were no God, you'd both be dead. The trip continued until dark, and they made their way for a little while then, but it was very dangerous in the remote roads of sparsely populated eastern Russia. So they would rest overnight instead of pushing through, though between the two of them they could have conceivably made the journey in just 3 or 4 days. The problem was, well, there were two problems. It would tax the vehicle's ramshackle infrastructure, and they would be much more exposed to the grid. Remote though they were, the internet was coast to coast in hemispherical Russia, and modern currency exchange predicated some presence in almost all cities or villages. Mellor knew Green Kolya would find them in short order that way. The Koreans would otherwise. And of course there was the Brotherhood of the Dragon's Tail to consider. They may not have been only allegiant to Green Kolya, those brothers, those dragon tails, but their interests were certainly intertwined now that a sort of feud between traveler clans was in its infancy. Any mainstream, openly visible travel would put eyes on them, and whether those eyes were governmental or fringe, they would be beacons for their pursuers. So they drove in the night when they could and camped in the light and made 100 miles a day on the bumpy roads in the old motorhome. Then came the first real snow, and the game changed. Truly they had been lucky, leaving ahead of the season's birth. Like water breaking before the baby comes, in the northern lands, the first snow ushers in a seasonal shift. Don't misunderstand. By first snow, locals don't mean the first time water freezes and sprinkles down from the sky. That could be July. By first snow, the locals mean the one that sticks. It lays down a carpet of cold, and that carpet remains till the following year's thaw. In their little old ramshackle RV, they had made headway against this coming winter onslaught, but it finally did catch them. Mellor and Sonechka could see the snow beginning to flurry as they drove. The sky changing so fast, clouds looked like they were fleeing the end of time. It was about 11 in the morning. Sonechka said, No, this is not good. Mellor didn't need her to explain. He said, How far until the nearest settlement with a maintained road? She looked at him wildly a moment, then stared ahead and exhaled. At this rate, 3 hours. Tinda. Tinda, Mellor repeated. Are the children of Moksha known there? It's possible, but only in rumor. I say it's unlikely. Mellor made a grunting noise. Sonetchka's prophecy proved accurate, but the time became 4 hours rather than 3, as in the last hour falling snow thickened substantially. The tires of the RV were oversized and designed for such circumstances, but had their limits. Mellor was compelled to climb out at one point near the top of a slight hill and let some air out of them for better traction. Finally, they came through foothills and over a questionable bridge to Tinda. Mellor found somewhere in a rundown area of industrial warehouses to park. He looked for one that didn't have any evidence of recent activity, eventually finding a prefab steel structure about the size of a hangar. The door was open, nobody was inside, there were no vehicles around, and a number of construction signs were laying on the floor. By the dust which rested on all things protected by the warehouse, nobody had continued the project that it used to protect in years. When they parked, Sonetchka quickly went about the exterior of the vehicle, removing anything that would immediately identify it as a gypsy unit, especially one potentially affiliated with the children of Moksha. Mellor had another idea. He found a piece of lumber that was bowed out, went to where their tracks were, came to the road, laid the board out, and carefully dragged it in after him, filling in his own footprints and their tire tread with snow. It was coming down thick enough now you couldn't even see across the street. If it kept up another half hour, none would know they had driven inside. They had parked away from the open doors, where beyond physically entering the abandoned structure, their unit wasn't immediately visible. Tinda was a railway town that developed in the early 20th century. It was several miles long and wide, and built around a central forest on a hill, acting like a sort of gathering area for the locals, of whom there were around 30,000. It was actually a good-sized community for the region, and only about a full day's drive from Yakutsk, though in the last decade it had lost about a quarter of its population, owing to changing economic realities and government machinations around the 2020 crisis. Despite being only around 500 miles from Yakutsk, weather had a way of seriously expanding distances between settlements and Russia, especially in that remote northern region, where even July had a record low under freezing on the Fahrenheit scale. For that month, late October, the average temperature was barely over freezing, and record lows had dropped to 20 under zero. They were somewhere in the middle of that temperature range now, and the storm would continue several days. The RV was stocked well enough they didn't have issues immediately, and the wood stove worked well enough for warmth. It was certainly superior, at least in terms of remaining hidden, to growling generators. Even so, by day 3 of the storm, all that was left were a few gallons of water, or that which they could melt from the snow. Mellor said, "I'm the least likely to be recognized." Sonetchka scoffed. "What? They know you in North Korea. They know you in Moscow. But there's a gypsy war on, and you're a red-headed, green-eyed Asian woman who happens to be a treat for the eyes of any man. Dress like a dyke and you'll still turn heads. I just look like another starving peasant." "But you're white. They're mostly Saka." "We can't send Himari. She only speaks Japanese. You're going to draw a crowd like magnets. I'll scarf up, and none will see me. Hand me my pack." At length they agreed, but before he left, Mellor said, "Do you have a gun around this camper?" "If Volodya didn't take his weapons with him, he's an idiot," was Sonetchka's reply. "Yes, I thought as much. Here," and he gave her one. "I'll knock like this," and he rapped in 5 slow beats against the door. 5. "Not less than 5, Himari repeated from beneath half a dozen blankets on the bed over the camper in Japanese, catching the gist of the conversation. "You should be able to stay warm with the wood stove." "We know, Mel. We've been using it 3 days. "Well." Mellor shouldered his pack, wrapped a scarf around his face, and headed into the snow. It had quit coming down, but was blowing viciously, and the air was exceptionally cold as the wind hit from the nearby river. It was several blocks to the town's main drag. He stayed in alleys and carefully checked for surveillance tech whenever he came to an intersection. Except for modern facilities, that was going to be a rarity this deep in Siberia. Only one or two streets in town were even plowed, which said something about Tinda's municipal arrangement. Still, the locals tended to hunker down and see to their business locally in winter. Sometimes even the great highways weren't passable for months at a time, not unless you were either part of a clearing team or one of the great overland truckers who drove about in caravans across rivers of ice and the like. He spied a miniature forest on a hill like a park in the town center, the whole of the donut. He crossed over to avoid walking around, finally found a grocer, and stocked up on a variety of dry goods. He grabbed 3 gallons of water in a plastic container. They were heavy, but the pack could handle the weight. He never removed the scarf, his hat, or anything else when he made his way through the store. He also had a pair of sunglasses he put on just before he made his entry. He didn't say a word to anyone, and when the cashier turned to him for the total, he slowly held a finger to his lips, or at least where they'd be under the scarf, and slid her $100 bill. She looked at it carefully, then smiled at him and mirrored his gesture, putting her own gnarled finger to the extensive makeup on and around her lips. Mellor made his exit and headed back the way he had come, naturally cutting through the copse of trees in the middle of town once more. This turned out to be a valuable decision. Atop the hill, he could see all around, though his view was mildly eclipsed by trees bereft of leaves and full of snow. Clearly, they had been planted, or they were not firs, as they were not firs. Right in the middle of the hill, toward the top, was a bit of a pasture designed to corral local livestock, which Mellor skirted around as before. As he picked his way down the other side, he saw the first jet black SUV. It was followed by its brother, and a whole family of them showed up. Mellor removed his pack, withdrew a gun, and crouched down, using a whole tree trunk for cover and peeking out. They were driving slowly, street to street, taking careful note of everything and looking keenly for any clue. They would have been much less notable if the wind weren't blowing 30 miles an hour and the terrible cold as the season's first blizzard spent itself. Clearly, something was going on that forced them to challenge the weather. Any local could see that. Mellor was especially sensitive to this reality. What he didn't expect was the showdown he witnessed. 3 large trucks, the sort that would transport goods between remote Siberian towns over snow, with great tires and engines never deactivated when winter began, drove to block the way of the SUVs. There were 5 black Suburbans and 3 of these trucks. A little man with black sunglasses hopped out and began marching toward the driver of the trucks. Mellor couldn't see if he was the evil little schemer from North Korea who had executed Malchin, but the body language of this person reminded him of that individual. Harsh words were exchanged, and abruptly there were gunshots. Glass broke, and one of the trucks exploded. Mellor couldn't see if it was the result of a grenade or some other weapon, but the blast knocked one truck into another, and the third barely managed to reverse in time. Now men were boiling from the trucks like ants out of a stomped colony. Mellor was able to see a green dragon's tail on at least one jacket. The tide turned. They ran on the SUVs. Only 1 or 2 dropped before they reached them. Now the fight had become kinetic, and by the end, 4 or 5 men piled into the last SUV to escape, while the remaining truck wasn't able to back up before flat sirens indicated the presence of local emergency response personnel. Mellor watched them delay the last truck, but in a few moments it was released and went on its way. Corruption. It had to be. The locals must have been scared of green colia. Definitely dead bodies were getting covered in snow at that very moment in the street where the confrontation occurred. None should have been allowed to leave. Despite the cold, Mellor waited until nightfall to finish his journey back to the warehouse with Sonechka, Himari, and the motorhome. He had time to think. He had time to consider that if they did run into these people, they would either give up that cube Himari held and be executed, or be executed and the cube would be taken. North Korea was willing to risk an international incident for it in Russia. Green Kolya and VKD had no scruples about bending any and all law anywhere they went. And such a thing was practically a non-event for most Russians if there was even a modest amount of bribery involved. All Mellor could see was a wall of death for them all. And yet there was the girl Green Kolya kidnapped to leverage him, his own unknown daughter. Did he really believe Kolya? Mellor wasn't sure. But he could only sense a dark end for them all unless something was done. Maybe Gypsy Sonechka could get away, but Himari was helpless. Whatever he did, good or bad, it was going to land right in her lap, and she'd have no idea what to do about it. He shook his head. She was broken-minded and innocent. Balalaika, man, he muttered, and stared at his feet in the snow a little while. They would be hunted until the prey of the cube were attained by the dragon-tail hunters, or the Korean sharks. There was no way they'd make it another 500 miles, another 1,000 kilometers, another 13 hours up the road to Yakutsk, not with the blizzard and so few routes to choose from, and so many eyes looking for them. He had to get the dogs off their trail somehow. But he knew how, didn't he? Mellor made his decision. He went down the other side of the hill, eventually managing to bribe someone at the dingiest motel he could find to use a lobby phone. Green Kolya picked up very quickly. Kolya, I have it, and I'm headed to Yakutsk. Let me speak with my daughter. There was a satisfied noise on the other end of the line. How about I send for you, and you bring it to me comfortably, and you have your rendezvous then? Mellor laughed. Things get complex these days, Kolya. Yes, and I don't know how much longer I can care for your daughter. You know, she has begun to wonder whether or not this vacation we've given her is strictly optional. If she attempts to escape and must be controlled, well, who knows what could happen? It's been months, Mellor. You should be thanking me I've treated her as well as I have. You're going to deliver her to me in one piece, or you'll never see this cube. I know all kinds of people who want it. Tell you what, I can send you some video. I'll even go to the trouble of proving it's from today. How about that? You tell me where to send it, and then maybe you can send me some evidence of your own. And give myself away to your tech people. Not a chance. So, our impasse. Now Mellor lied cleverly. We're all the way in Novskyanka. You've got time. I'm going to want to see my daughter at the exchange first. I see her first, so you don't get cube. Who is we? That's for me to worry about, Mellor temporized, cursing mentally. I'll contact you in Yakutsk. You'll have your trinket in a week. That is, so long as I'll have my daughter. Yakutsk. Well, anyway, she's so excited to meet you, said Green Kolya. And I'm so excited to see you myself. I look forward to it. And he hung up, leaving the dingy lobby and making his way back to the warehouse. He thought that little maneuver would ease the weight on him. But somehow he felt worse than ever. On the other end of the line, Pyotr had recently come up the escalator. He said, See, Iskentel knows. 2 weeks on the dot, Green Kolya remarked, and both fellows laughed. Then Green Kolya maneuvered his substantial frame from behind the desk. Run a trace. But he called on a landline, I'm sure of it. You'll come with me to Yakutsk, won't you, Pyotr? Already done. Yeah, it's an Eastern line, and that's all you can tell with these old systems. He made gestures in the air, adjusting his AR headset over his stringy blue hair, then said, Of course, I'll come. Then said, Of course I'll come. What choice have I got? I must be there, not only to network it in. Get your things, at least put on a shirt. Right now? Yes, right now. You think he'll play straight? He definitely was not in whatever town he said. Mellor Romanov is clever. He may never have left Vladivostok. We must be prepared to preemptively intercept him. Contact our Dragon's Tail fellows. Have them leave off going village to village and make a caravan to Yakutsk. We need to find where he's going before he gets there. To what end? Insurance. said Green Kolya.